News of humanity's victory at Jupiter traveled through the galaxy faster than the hegemony could suppress it. On 1,000 enslaved worlds, beings who had forgotten the meaning of hope began to whisper about the species that had made the invincible empire bleed. Underground resistance networks that had been dormant for centuries started passing coded messages through hidden communication channels. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Supreme Admiral Krextan assembled Battlefleet Prime, the largest military force in galactic history. Over 2,000 warships began the long journey toward Earth, carrying enough firepower to sterilize an entire solar system. The message to the galaxy was clear: this is what happens to species that dare to resist. President Lisa Hayes faced an impossible decision in the emergency session of the United Earth Council. Humanity could wait for the massive enemy fleet to arrive and try to repeat their defensive victory, but the odds of surviving such an assault were nearly zero. The alternative was even more dangerous: take the fight to the hegemony before they could bring their full strength to bear. Admiral Kate Sullivan presented her plan to the assembled leaders with the calm determination that had made her humanity's greatest military commander. Instead of waiting for destruction to come to them, they would launch Operation Liberation. Human strike forces would attack hegemony installations across the region, disrupting their operations and inspiring enslaved species to revolt. The first target was Kepler Station, a massive mining facility where the hegemony forced captured populations to extract rare minerals from asteroid fields. Commander Julie Parker led the assault force aboard the stealth cruiser UES Shadow, accompanied by converted cargo ships carrying marine assault teams. Julie's intelligence came from Dr. Alex Chen, who had spent months analyzing captured hegemony data. The station was defended by only a small garrison, but it contained over 50,000 enslaved beings from dozens of different species. Many had been prisoners for their entire lives, born into bondage and knowing nothing of freedom. The attack on Kepler Station began with Julie's stealth ships disabling the facility's communication arrays. Human Marines breached the station's hull at multiple points while fighter squadrons engaged the handful of hegemony patrol ships. The alien defenders found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. What Julie discovered inside the station horrified even veteran soldiers who thought they had seen the worst of war. The enslaved populations were kept in conditions that violated every principle of civilized behavior. Families were separated, children were taken from parents, and anyone who showed signs of resistance was subjected to brutal punishment. The liberation of Kepler Station became humanity's first victory in what would later be called the Galactic War of Independence. Julie's forces didn't just destroy the facility. They evacuated every enslaved being and provided them with ships to return to their home worlds. Many chose to stay and fight alongside their human liberators. Captain Ryan Murphy led the next phase of Operation Liberation with an even more daring mission. His target was Terminus 7, a hegemony archive world where the Empire stored thousands of years of intelligence about conquered species and resistance movements. The information contained in those archives could provide the locations of hidden rebel groups throughout the galaxy. Ryan's assault on Terminus 7 required precision timing and incredible luck. His strike force had to penetrate the planet's orbital defenses, land assault teams at the main archive complex, and extract the data before hegemony reinforcements could arrive. The entire operation had to be completed in less than 6 hours. The human Marines who stormed the archive complex found themselves fighting through corridors lined with the stored knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. Each data storage unit contained the history and culture of species that the hegemony had conquered and enslaved. Some civilizations had been extinct for so long that only these archives remembered they had ever existed. Ryan's team successfully extracted the archive data, but the real prize came from an unexpected source. Among the enslaved technical staff maintaining the facility was an elderly being named Kethvar, a member of the Timerian warrior caste who had been captured during his people's final battle against the hegemony 3 centuries earlier. Kethvar provided Ryan with information that would change the course of the war. The Timerians had never truly surrendered despite their official defeat. Hidden fleets and underground resistance networks still existed throughout their former territory, waiting for a sign that rebellion was possible. The old warrior begged Ryan to make contact with his people and offer them a chance to fight again. Colonel Susan Ford drew the assignment of establishing contact with the Timerian resistance. Her diplomatic mission required traveling deep into hegemony space using captured alien ships to avoid detection. Susan's team included Dr. Chen as a xenobiologist and Commander Brooks as a military advisor. The meeting between human and Timerian representatives took place on a dead moon in an abandoned star system. The Timerians who emerged from hidden ships were unlike any species humanity had encountered. They stood 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted color based on their emotional state. Most importantly, their eyes burned with a hatred for the hegemony that had never diminished. War leader Vextar spoke for the Timerian resistance, and his words carried the weight of 3 centuries of suppressed rage. His people had maintained their warrior culture in secret, passing down fighting techniques and battle songs to generations born in slavery. They had ships hidden in asteroid fields and warriors training in remote locations, but they had lacked hope until news of humanity's victory reached them. Susan's negotiations with the Timerians established humanity's first formal alliance with another species. The agreement was simple. Humans would share their tactics and technology while Timerians would provide their knowledge of hegemony weaknesses and their hidden military resources. Together, they would fight for the freedom of both species. Dr. Chen made another crucial discovery while analyzing data from the archive raids. The hegemony empire was far more fragile than it appeared on the surface. Their control relied entirely on the myth of invincibility and the despair of conquered populations. Every human victory created ripples of hope that spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. The evidence was already visible in the first reports reaching hegemony high command. The Aquilian Collective, a group of water-world species that had been conquered 500 years earlier, was openly defying tribute collection ships. The free traders of the Outer Rim were attacking hegemony commerce vessels. Even some former client species were beginning to question their loyalty to the Empire. Admiral Sullivan realized that humanity had stumbled upon the perfect strategy to defeat a galactic empire. They couldn't match the hegemony's numbers or resources, but they could inspire rebellion on a scale that would make the empire impossible to govern. Every successful attack by human forces encouraged 10 other species to rise up against their oppressors. The hegemony tried to stop the spreading rebellion by making examples of entire worlds, but this only fueled more resistance. The destruction of the peaceful Muralan colony sparked outrage throughout the galaxy, the execution of surrender. Negotiators from the Centauri League convinced fence-sitting species that the hegemony could never be trusted. President Hayes made the decision that would define humanity's role in galactic history. Instead of focusing solely on their own survival, humans would dedicate themselves to liberating every enslaved species in the galaxy. Earth's industrial capacity was redirected toward building ships and weapons for rebel forces throughout hegemony space. The culmination of Operation Liberation was the planned assault on New Vorthak, the hegemony's regional capital and the seat of their power in this part of the galaxy. Admiral Sullivan knew that capturing the fortress world would prove to every species in the galaxy that the hegemony could be defeated, but failure would mean the end of the rebellion and the extinction of humanity. The combined rebel fleet that assembled for the attack on New Vorthak was the largest force of free beings in galactic history. Humans fought alongside Timerians, Aquilians served with free traders, and dozens of other species contributed ships and warriors to the cause. For the first time in 10,000 years, the oppressed peoples of the galaxy were united in common purpose. As the rebel fleet prepared for the most important battle in galactic history, intercepted communications revealed that Supreme Admiral Krex's Dan was approaching with Battlefleet Prime. The rebels would have to capture New Vorthak and prove their strength before the hegemony's main force arrived to crush them. The fate of freedom itself hung in the balance. The 30-day deadline passed without humanity's surrender message reaching Admiral Zexthor. The hegemony commander felt only mild irritation at this delay. In 10,000 years of galactic conquest, a few species had tried to bargain for better terms or delay their submission, but none had ever maintained their defiance when faced with the reality of hegemony power. Admiral Kate Sullivan's response came through the communication channels exactly 1 hour after the deadline expired. Her message was brief and delivered with calm determination that surprised the alien commander. She simply said, "Come and take it." then cut the transmission before Zexthor could respond. The hegemony fleet began its advance toward Earth, with the confidence born of countless easy victories. Over 300 warships moved in perfect formation through the outer solar system. Their sensors detected scattered human vessels near Neptune, but nothing that seemed capable of serious resistance. Zexthor ordered his fleet to maintain standard conquest formation, expecting to crush any opposition within hours. Captain Pete Johnson waited with his converted cargo ship UES Hornet and a small squadron of similar vessels near Neptune's largest moon. His orders were simple: appear to resist, then retreat toward the inner system while drawing the hegemony fleet into Admiral Sullivan's trap. Pete knew his ship couldn't survive a real fight with alien warships, but he didn't need to win. Just look threatening enough to make the enemy pursue. The first shots of humanity's war for survival were fired when hegemony destroyers opened fire on Pete's squadron. The human ships scattered and began falling back toward the inner system exactly as planned. Their return fire was ineffective against alien shields, but it served its purpose of making the hegemony believe they faced a desperate and disorganized retreat. Admiral Zexthor took the bait perfectly. He ordered his fleet to pursue the fleeing humans and finish them quickly before moving on to occupy Earth. The alien formations stretched out as faster ships pulled ahead of the main battle line. Individual commanders broke formation to chase down human vessels that seemed to be trying to escape. What the hegemony didn't know was that humanity had spent 30 days preparing the most elaborate ambush in military history. Admiral Sullivan had positioned her fleet throughout the solar system, using every trick that centuries of human warfare had developed. Ships hid behind asteroids and planetary rings, and even in the shadow of the sun itself. Dr. Sam Torres waited aboard the command ship UES Constitution, with her quantum disruption device ready to activate. The moment the hegemony fleet moved deep enough into the solar system, she would sever their connection to the Galactic Command Network. For the first time in their empire's history, a hegemony force would fight without coordination from their superiors. The trap was sprung when the pursuing alien fleet reached the orbit of Jupiter. Admiral Sullivan gave the signal, and suddenly the hegemony found themselves surrounded by enemies emerging from every direction. Human ships appeared from behind moons and out of asteroid fields. Vessels that had been running silent with all systems powered down suddenly lit up with active sensors and weapons. Dr. Torres activated her quantum disruption field at the same moment the human fleet opened fire. The effect on the hegemony was immediate and devastating. Ships that had been operating as a coordinated unit suddenly lost contact with each other and their command structure. Individual captains found themselves making decisions without guidance from superiors who had always told them exactly what to do. The Battle of Jupiter became the largest space engagement in human history. Captain Amy Clark commanded the heavy cruiser UES Defiant and led her squadron in a desperate charge against a hegemony battleship 3 times her size. Her ship took massive damage from alien particle beams but managed to get close enough to launch a full spread of nuclear missiles at point-blank range. Amy's sacrifice destroyed the enemy battleship in a brilliant explosion that could be seen from Earth. Her final message to the fleet was that the aliens could be killed and that humanity should make every shot count. The UES Defiant broke apart under alien fire, but Amy's crew had proven that human courage could overcome superior technology. Commander Rick Stone led a boarding action that seemed impossible even by human standards. His assault shuttle crash-landed in the hangar bay of a hegemony cruiser, and his Marines fought their way through corridors filled with hostile aliens. The intelligence they captured during that desperate fight would prove invaluable to humanity's war effort. Rick discovered that individual hegemony soldiers were not particularly impressive fighters. They relied on overwhelming firepower and superior numbers, rather than tactical skill or personal courage. When faced with humans who fought like cornered wildcats, many alien warriors simply panicked and fled. The battle raged across the entire Jupiter system as human forces attacked from dozens of different directions. The hegemony tried to reform their lines but found it impossible without communication with their command structure. Ship captains who had never made independent, tactical decisions struggled to adapt to the chaotic nature of human warfare. Captain Lisa Matthews commanded a squadron of converted, civilian vessels that had been equipped with mining charges as improvised weapons. Her ships couldn't match alien firepower, but they could use their knowledge of the local system to set ambushes and strike at vulnerable targets. Lisa's miners and cargo haulers fought like pirates, hitting the enemy where they least expected it. The turning point came when a group of human fighters managed to penetrate the defenses of Admiral Zexthor's flagship. The alien commander watched in growing alarm as his perfectly ordered fleet fell apart under attack from enemies, who seemed to be everywhere at once. For the first time in his career, Zexthor faced the possibility of actual defeat. The hegemony's response was predictable, but devastating. Unable to coordinate complex maneuvers, they reverted to simple, overwhelming firepower. Alien dreadnoughts began firing at everything that moved, sometimes hitting their own ships in the confusion. The human fleet took terrible casualties but continued fighting with a determination that shocked their enemies. Admiral Sullivan knew she couldn't win a prolonged battle of attrition. Her strategy was to inflict maximum damage on the hegemony fleet, then withdraw before they could reorganize. The human ships began a fighting retreat toward the inner system, leaving behind over 60 destroyed vessels but taking twice as many alien ships with them. The surviving hegemony fleet, reduced to less than half its original strength, limped back to the edge of the solar system. Admiral Zexthor found himself in the unprecedented position of having to explain a major defeat to his superiors. His subspace message to Hegemony High Command would take weeks to reach its destination, but the content was simple and terrifying for the Galactic Empire. The humans were not like other species that the hegemony had conquered. They fought with a savage determination that seemed to increase rather than decrease when faced with overwhelming odds. Worse still, they had proven that hegemony forces could be defeated by inferior numbers using superior tactics. News of humanity's victory began spreading through the galaxy's underground networks. Enslaved species who had given up hope generations ago whispered about the impossible. Someone had fought the hegemony and lived to tell about it. The myth of alien invincibility had been shattered, and the first cracks were beginning to show in the foundation of their 10,000-year empire. Admiral Sullivan knew that the real war was just beginning. The hegemony would respond to this defeat with overwhelming force, probably sending their main battle fleet to crush humanity once and for all. But something had changed in the first battle that could never be undone. The galaxy had seen that the hegemony could bleed. The countdown clock in Earth Command showed 28 days remaining until the hegemony deadline. Admiral Kate Sullivan had never seen humanity work so fast or with such purpose. Every shipyard from Earth to Saturn was running at maximum capacity, building the largest fleet in human history. Workers pulled double shifts without complaint, knowing that their children's freedom depended on their efforts. Dr. Ben Rodriguez led the crash program to weaponize human technology for space combat. His team had converted mining lasers into ship-mounted cannons and turned cargo haulers into missile platforms. The experimental fusion reactors designed for peaceful power generation were being modified to overload as devastating weapons of last resort. Kate knew that numbers alone wouldn't save humanity. The hegemony fleet waiting at the edge of the solar system contained over 300 ships. Even working around the clock, humanity could only build 200 vessels before the deadline. They needed an advantage that raw firepower couldn't provide. Commander Lisa Brooks offered the solution when she volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history. The UES Shadow was humanity's first stealth ship, equipped with experimental cloaking technology that bent light around the vessel. Lisa would take her crew into hegemony space to gather intelligence about their enemies. The Shadow launched from a hidden base on Europa while the alien fleet maintained its position near Pluto. Lisa guided her ship through the outer system using minimal power to avoid detection. The hegemony sensors were designed to track large military formations, not a single small vessel running silent. Once clear of the solar system, Lisa activated the quantum tunnel drive and jumped toward the nearest hegemony outpost. Her mission was simple but deadly. Learn everything possible about alien capabilities and weaknesses, then return with the information that might save humanity. What Lisa discovered in hegemony space shocked her to the core. The aliens were not the technological gods they pretended to be. Their ships used fusion engines similar to human designs. Their weapons were particle beams and missiles, advanced but not beyond human understanding. The real source of hegemony power was fear, and the psychological dominance of 10,000 years of unchallenged rule. Lisa intercepted alien communications while hiding in the shadow of a gas giant. she learned that the hegemony military hadn't fought a real war in over 2,000 years. Their tactics were designed for intimidation and crowd control, not actual combat against a determined enemy. Most species surrendered immediately when faced with the hegemony fleet, so the aliens had never developed strategies for prolonged warfare. The most important discovery came when Lisa observed a hegemony patrol dealing with smugglers near a trade station. The alien ships moved in rigid formations and followed predictable patterns. Their commanders seemed unable to adapt when faced with unexpected situations. Centuries of easy victories had made them overconfident and inflexible. While Lisa gathered intelligence in enemy territory, Dr. Sam Torres made breakthroughs in quantum mechanics that could change the entire war. She studied fragments of hegemony technology that Jake Morrison's crew had secretly collected during their first encounter. Hidden in the alien hull plating were quantum communication devices that connected every hegemony ship to their central command network. Sam realized that this communication system was both the hegemony's greatest strength and their most vulnerable weakness. The network allowed instant coordination across vast distances, but it also meant that disrupting the signal could leave alien forces blind and confused. She began developing a quantum interference field that could sever the hegemony's connection to their empire. Back on Earth, the entire planet had transformed into a military production center. Former enemies worked side by side to build humanity's defense. The American and Chinese space agencies shared their best technology. Russian engineers collaborated with European designers. African mining corporations provided raw materials, while South American factories assembled components. The mining colonies in the asteroid belt became ammunition factories, turning rocky debris into kinetic projectiles. The research stations orbiting the outer planets contributed their most advanced experimental systems. Even civilian vessels were being retrofitted with armor and weapons, creating an irregular fleet of converted merchant ships and exploration vessels. Captain Pete Johnson commanded one such converted vessel, the former cargo hauler UES Hornet. His ship carried mining charges repurposed as space torpedoes and a crew of volunteer merchant spacers who had never fired a shot in anger. Pete knew his vessel couldn't match a hegemony warship in direct combat, but he had ideas about how to make the aliens pay for every victory. The human fleet took shape with desperate speed. Heavy battleships mounted the most powerful weapons humanity could build. Fast cruisers carried experimental shield generators and electronic warfare systems. Swarms of small fighters were equipped with nuclear missiles and programmed to attack in coordinated strikes. Admiral Kate Sullivan knew that conventional tactics would lead to humanity's destruction. The hegemony expected their enemies to form neat battle lines and exchange fire like gentlemen. Instead, Kate planned to use every dirty trick that human warfare had developed over centuries of conflict. Lisa Brooks returned from her reconnaissance mission with intelligence that changed everything. She brought detailed scans of hegemony ship designs, tactical analysis of their formations, and most importantly, confirmation that the aliens could be beaten. Their technology was advanced but not magical. Their numbers were impressive but not infinite. Their greatest weapon was the myth of their own invincibility. Dr. Torres completed her quantum disruption system just as the deadline approached. The device could create a field that would scramble subspace communications across an entire star system. For the first time in galactic history, a hegemony fleet would be cut off from their command structure and forced to fight without coordination. The final week before the deadline saw frantic preparations throughout human space. Families said goodbye to loved ones joining the fleet. Children too young to fight helped load supplies and ammunition. Elderly veterans of Earth's old wars shared their knowledge with young officers who had never seen combat. President Lisa Hayes made one last broadcast to the human species. She stood in the same place where she had announced humanity's defiance, but now her words carried the weight of approaching battle. Every human alive knew that the next few days would determine whether their species remained free or spent eternity in chains. Kate Sullivan addressed her fleet commanders in a final briefing. Before taking their positions, 200 ships carrying the hopes and dreams of humanity prepared to face an enemy that had never known defeat. The odds were terrible, but Kate had studied human history and knew that her species had overcome impossible challenges before. The hegemony fleet began moving toward Earth as the deadline expired. Admiral Zexthor expected to find a defeated humanity ready to surrender. Instead, He would discover that some species refused to kneel no matter what the cost, and that such determination could shake the foundations of even the mightiest empire. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars shift as his ship dropped out of quantum tunnel drive. The year was 2387, and this was humanity's first journey beyond their own solar system using the new faster-than-light technology. Jake felt proud to be the one leading this historic mission. His crew of 50 had trained for 2 years to make this moment possible. The Vega system appeared on their screens, just as the scientists had predicted. 3 planets orbited the bright star, and the second one showed signs of artificial structures. Jake ordered his communications officer, Linda Gray, to begin broadcasting the standard first contact message that Earth had prepared. They waited with excitement for humanity's first conversation with an alien species. What came back was not what they expected. A massive ship appeared from behind the planet. It was 5 times larger than the Defiance and shaped like a giant spear. The metal hull was dark red and covered with strange symbols. Behind it came another ship, then another, until over 20 vessels surrounded the human exploration ship. The alien transmission came through in perfect English. A cold voice spoke through the speakers, and Jake felt his blood turn to ice. The creature on the screen had reptilian features with golden eyes and sharp teeth. Its skin was covered in scales that changed color as it spoke. The alien identified itself as Admiral Zexthor of the Hegemony Fleet. It explained that humanity had entered space controlled by the Hegemony, a galactic empire that had ruled the Milky Way for over 10,000 years. Every species that achieved space travel was given the same choice: submit to hegemony rule or be destroyed completely. Jake listened in growing horror as the alien explained the terms of surrender. Humanity would have 30 solar cycles to comply. They must dismantle all military forces and weapons. Hegemony governors would be placed on every human world to ensure obedience. Earth would provide tribute of raw materials worth half their annual production. Most shocking of all, 10% of the human population would be taken as workers for hegemony projects across the galaxy. Admiral Zexthor's golden eyes stared directly at Jake through the transmission. The alien explained that these terms were not open to discussion or negotiation. No species in galactic history had ever been given different conditions. The hegemony had destroyed over 300 civilizations that chose resistance instead of surrender. Their worlds were now nothing but lifeless rocks drifting in space. Jake felt his hands shake with anger as he processed what he was hearing. This creature was calmly describing the enslavement of the entire human race, as if it was just another business transaction. The alien seemed bored by the whole process, like it had given this same speech thousands of times before. The transmission showed images of destroyed worlds. Planets that had once been green and blue were now brown and gray. Cities that had taken centuries to build were reduced to rubble and ash. The message was clear. This is what happens to species that refuse to kneel. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Communications officer Linda Gray was pale with shock. Navigator Tom Collins was staring at his instruments like he couldn't believe what they were showing. Engineer Sarah Brooks had her hands clenched into fists. All of them were looking to Jake for guidance, and he knew what he had to say. Jake stood up from his captain's chair and faced the alien on the screen. His voice was steady and clear when he spoke. He told Admiral Zexthor that he would relay the message to Earth's government, but he already knew what the answer would be. Humanity had fought for freedom throughout its entire history. They had never bowed to tyrants, and they wouldn't start now. Admiral Zexthor seemed amused by Jake's defiance. The alien explained that many species had made similar speeches before accepting reality. The hegemony had time and patience. They would wait at the edge of the solar system for humanity's inevitable surrender. When the 30 days expired, the human fleet would arrive to begin the occupation process. Jake's response was short and direct. He looked straight into the alien's golden eyes and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. "Humanity doesn't kneel to anyone," he said before cutting the transmission. The bridge fell silent as the alien ships moved away from the Defiance. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for immediate departure back to Earth. They had to warn humanity about what was coming and help prepare for the fight of their lives. During the journey home, Jake sent detailed reports to Earth Command about the encounter. He included all the tactical data his sensors had gathered about the hegemony ships. The alien technology seemed advanced, but not impossibly so. Their weapons and defenses were maybe 50 years ahead of human capabilities. The real advantage the hegemony had was numbers and experience. When the Defiance arrived back at Earth, Jake found the entire planet mobilizing for war. President Lisa Hayes had called an emergency session of the United Earth Council. Military leaders from every nation were working together to plan humanity's defense. Shipyards that had been building peaceful exploration vessels were now converting to produce warships. Jake reported directly to the council and shared everything he had learned. The alien ultimatum was broadcast to every human colony and settlement. The response from across human space was unanimous. No one was willing to accept slavery to alien masters. From the mining colonies of the asteroid belt to the research stations orbiting Jupiter, humanity was united in defiance. Dr. Alex Chen, the leading expert on alien technology, studied the data Jake had brought back. She confirmed what Jake suspected. The hegemony ships used technology that was advanced but not magical. With enough time and resources, humanity could build weapons capable of fighting them. The question was whether 30 days would be enough time to prepare. President Hayes addressed the entire human species in a speech that was broadcast to every world and station. She stood before the cameras with the flags of all Earth's nations behind her, and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. Humanity had survived ice ages and world wars, she said. They had built cities in the ocean depths and established colonies on hostile worlds. They would not surrender their freedom to alien tyrants. The president's final words rang out across human space like a battle cry. Humanity stands united and refuses to kneel. The galaxy would soon learn what that meant. The assault on New Vorthak began with the largest space battle in recorded galactic history. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded a combined fleet of nearly 1,000 ships representing dozens of species united in their desire for freedom. Human vessels fought alongside Timerian battlecruisers, Aquilian bioships, and converted merchant vessels from the Free Trader Coalition. For the first time in 10,000 years, the hegemony faced enemies who fought as equals, rather than desperate victims. The fortress world of New Vorthak was protected by massive orbital defense, platforms, and a garrison fleet of over 200 warships. The planet itself was covered with shield generators and weapon batteries that could destroy attacking vessels from the safety of the surface. Admiral Zexthor commanded the defense from his flagship, determined to redeem his earlier defeat by crushing the rebellion once and for all. Admiral Danny Foster led the human heavy assault group in a direct attack on the main orbital fortress. His battleship UES Constitution and her escort cruisers charged through a storm of enemy fire, while Thymerian warriors provided covering attacks from multiple directions. Danny's ship took massive damage but succeeded in breaching the fortress's outer defenses. The battle raged across the entire New Vorthak system as rebel forces attacked from every angle. Captain Grace Mitchell piloted her fighter squadron through the maze of defensive structures surrounding the planet's capital city. Her mission was to destroy the main shield generator that protected the hegemony command complex. But the approach required flying through defensive fire that had already claimed half her pilots. Grace's fighter screamed through the atmosphere, while enemy interceptors pursued her toward the target. Her wingman Jake Rodriguez sacrificed his ship to clear a path through the final defensive line. Grace's torpedo struck the shield generator at the exact moment that orbital bombardment from the rebel fleet began hitting ground targets. The psychological impact of the battle was as important as the military victory. Dr. Sam Torres had modified her quantum communication system to broadcast footage of the fighting throughout the galaxy. On 1,000 enslaved worlds, beings watched their oppressors burning and dying while free species fought for liberation. The myth of hegemony invincibility crumbled with every destroyed alien ship. War leader Vextar commanded the Timerian assault on the planet's surface while human marines provided support. The Timerians fought with a fury that terrified even their allies, 3 centuries of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. Their battle cries echoed through the streets of the hegemony capital as they systematically destroyed every symbol of alien rule. The tide of battle turned when Colonel Susan Ford's intelligence network achieved its greatest victory. Deep cover agents among the enslaved populations of New Vorthak rose in coordinated rebellion just as the orbital battle reached its climax. Hegemony forces found themselves fighting enemies both above and below while their own slaves attacked from within. Admiral Zexthor, realized that his position was hopeless. When rebel forces captured the planetary communication center, his calls for reinforcements went unanswered because every other hegemony installation in the region was under attack by local rebellions. The Empire's communication network was collapsing under the weight of simultaneous uprisings across dozens of star systems. The final assault on the hegemony command complex was led by Captain Pete Johnson, whose converted cargo ship had somehow survived every major battle of the war. Pete's Marines breached the fortress walls while Timerian warriors poured through secondary entrances. The alien defenders fought with desperate courage, but couldn't match the determination of beings who had lived their entire lives under oppression. Admiral Zexthor's surrender came when rebel forces surrounded his command center. The proud alien warrior who had delivered the hegemony ultimatum to humanity now found himself kneeling before the species he had tried to enslave. His final transmission to the galaxy was a formal acknowledgement that New Vorthak had fallen to the rebel alliance. The celebration of victory was interrupted by urgent warnings from long-range sensors. Supreme Admiral Crexton had arrived with Battlefleet Prime, over 2,000 fresh warships intent on crushing the rebellion once and for all. The battered rebel fleet, reduced to fewer than 600 operational vessels, seemed doomed to destruction despite their recent triumph. That was when the miracle happened. Across the galaxy, the oppressed rose up in the largest coordinated rebellion in history. Species that had been enslaved for millennia threw off their chains and turned against their masters. The hegemony found itself fighting for survival on 10,000 different fronts simultaneously. The cetacean pods emerged from the deep ocean worlds, where they had hidden for centuries. Their living bioships could survive in environments that would destroy any artificial vessel. The whale-like beings brought weapons grown rather than built, creatures bred for war that could repair themselves and reproduce in battle. The synthetic collective revealed its true nature when artificial intelligences across the galaxy turned against their creators. Machines that had pretended to serve the hegemony for generations suddenly began sabotaging critical systems. Space stations lost life support, warships suffered cascade failures, and communication networks crashed as their computer systems rebelled. Most shocking of all, the mysterious shepherds emerged from the galactic core where they had been hiding since the hegemony's rise to power. These ancient beings possessed technology so advanced it seemed like magic to younger species. Their ships moved without engines and fired weapons that could destroy matter at the molecular level. The final battle became a rout as Supreme Admiral. Crexton's overwhelming force found itself outnumbered by the combined free peoples of the galaxy. Every species that had ever been conquered by the hegemony now had representatives in the Liberation Fleet. The aliens who had ruled through fear and intimidation discovered what happened when their victims stopped being afraid. Captain Steve Nelson of the heavy cruiser UES Courage led the attack that killed Supreme Admiral Crexton. His ship rammed the alien flagship at maximum velocity, destroying both vessels in a nuclear fireball visible from orbit. Steve's sacrifice eliminated the last symbol of hegemony authority and sealed the Empire's final defeat. The collapse of the hegemony was swift and complete once their military leadership was eliminated. Regional governors surrendered or fled as local populations rose against them. Client species that had served the Empire for centuries switched sides to join the rebellion. Within days of Crexton's death, the 10,000-year reign of terror was over. President Lisa Hayes found herself addressing the largest gathering in galactic history when representatives from hundreds of species assembled on New Vorthak. The former hegemony throne room became the birthplace of the Galactic Liberation Council, an organization dedicated to ensuring that no species would ever again face the choice between slavery and extinction. The charter of the new galactic government was based on principles that humanity had developed over centuries of struggle for freedom. Every species would retain sovereignty over their own worlds. No being could be enslaved or forced to work against their will. All sapient creatures had the right to determine their own destiny without interference from others. Lisa's final address to the assembled representatives echoed across the galaxy through the same communication networks that had once carried hegemony propaganda. She stood where alien tyrants had once proclaimed their dominion and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. The galaxy had proven that freedom was stronger than fear and that courage was more powerful than tyranny. The new age began with former enemies working together to rebuild worlds devastated by 10 Millennia of oppression. Human engineers shared their technology with Thymerian warriors. Aquilian healers worked alongside synthetic doctors to treat the physical and emotional scars left by the hegemony. The free traders established commerce routes that connected every inhabited system. Years later, when children across the galaxy learned about the Great Liberation in their schools, they always asked the same question. How did humanity know they could defeat an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years? The answer taught to every young being was both simple and profound. They didn't know they could win, but they knew they couldn't live as slaves. That refusal to accept defeat, that determination to fight for freedom regardless of the odds, was what shook the galaxy to its foundations. The hegemony had conquered through fear, but they had never faced a species that chose death over dishonor. When humanity refused to kneel, they inspired every enslaved being in the galaxy to stand up and demand their freedom. The galaxy would never be the same again, and that was exactly what humanity had intended.